I mean, look at this spoon. I'm like obsessed with it. Love her. I'm Yewande, and today we're talking about plantains. I'm gonna walk you through 3 different recipes and the 2 main stages of ripeness. The first recipe is a plantain with jammy tomatoes and eggs. And the second recipe is like a nice light salad where I roast the plantains in the oven and add them to a bean and herb salad. And the third recipe is a fritter. So I go with like really dark plantains and they add like a softness to the batter. During my research, I found out that plantains are actually a cultivar of bananas. And I think that what differentiates plantains from bananas is that you can eat bananas raw, and plantains are so starchy that you can't really eat them raw. It's kind of like trying to eat a raw potato. So the dish that you're preparing kind of determines what stage of plantain you want to use. The green and starchier version is better for like soups and stews. These are tostones, which are made with green plantains, and they're twice fried. So at the firm yellow stage, they're still pretty starchy. They're just a touch sweeter than the green plantains. So they'll do really well in a soup or stew. You can also boil them, you can fry them at this stage. It really just depends on what you're looking for, how much of a sweet tooth you have. At like the softer yellow stage, you can see that it's got a bunch of like dark spots on it at this stage, and if you smush down on the skin a little bit, it's a little tender. They'll hold their shape at this stage, but they're much sweeter than any of these other 2. So these are called dodo in Nigeria, and these are it's basically a fried sweet plantain. And then this is my favorite stage where it's like really black on the outside. These will add like a custardy sweetness to a baked good. These can be fried as a fritter. These can just be fried as is. At this stage, they'll soak up a lot more oil. These are called maduros. The plantains kind of cut on the bias in slices. I grew up in Nigeria and we had plantains just everywhere. Plantains are often served as a starch accompanying eggs in Nigeria. So this first dish is a plantain and egg situation. It's like plantains cooked in a jammy tomato sauce, and it's a dish that's like a 1-pot meal. It's really rich. The plantains add like thickness and body to the stew. It just requires that you use a firm plantain because you are cooking it in a broth or stew, and so you don't really want it to fall apart. You want it to hold its shape. So green plantains are great. Firm yellow plantains are also great. I prefer using firm yellow plantains for this dish because they add a little bit of sweetness. I am, however, going to walk you through the process of peeling a green plantain because I think it would be helpful. So I always start with taking off the ends of the plantain, either end, just slice them off. And then the next step is to create a slit in the plantain skin, and you only want to create the slit in the skin. You're not going all the way through the plantain flesh. I sort of like pry the skin off, and you could see that it's a little stuck to the plantain flesh, but once you pry it off, you can get your thumb in there and sort of like peel it. You sort of have to peel back the skin first before you remove it. I love that sound. So same thing with the yellow plantain. Cut off the ends. And this I could just peel back really easily with my fingers. And you can hear it's not as crunchy. And that's it. For this recipe, I'm just cutting the plantain into thirds and then slicing it down the middle. And these little guys get seared off. That's about 2 tablespoons of oil in there. Basically, when you sear or fry a plantain, if it's really ripe, the sugars in the plantain start to caramelize. So depending on how ripe it is, that just determines how much caramelization is going to happen. With this dish, I'm only searing the cut side. You don't have to flip them because you're going to cook it in the stew. So like I'm only searing it to get some color. That's the color you're looking for, just the light golden brown. Next step is adding in the remaining oil, which is about 1 tablespoon. I'm gonna sear the onions and the garlic. The roasted red peppers go in. I'm adding a Scotch bonnet for spice. I'm not gonna chop this up. I'm just gonna poke little holes in it because I really just want the flavor of the Scotch bonnet, not necessarily all the heat that comes with it. A really important step is to just break up the tomatoes. Just use your spatula or your fingers if you want. And then I rinse out the tomato can with about 1 cup of water. So you're just reducing this until the sauce thickens a little bit, about 3/4 of its original volume. I'm adding the plantains with the seared side up, and you want to submerge the non-cooked side of the plantain in the sauce so that it cooks. But the sauce is starting to thicken a little bit. So this is done. The plantains are cooked. Make little craters in the sauce for the eggs. You don't have to do this, but I think that I just have better control in where the egg goes if I crack it into a bowl first than cracking it right in the dish. Cover it. You just need about 5 to 7 minutes. Oh, that looks like it's done. I'm going to take out the Scotch bonnet and the bay leaf. You don't want anyone to bite into it. Remove from heat. And then garnish it with fresh herbs. So to serve, I just like to get a little bit of everything. Like a little tomatoes, a little sauce, some plantains, and then garnish it with more herbs. I think this is great as breakfast, brunch. It's also vegetarian. You can substitute the egg for tofu if you want to do it vegan, for like soft tofu. I think that the plantains add sweetness, the tomatoes add some acidity, the herbs some freshness, so it's got a lot going for it. Okay, this is a caramelized plantain with beans, scallions, and lemon. We're using for this dish yellow plantains with black spots. The first step is to slice the plantains down the middle. So you get a nice, beautiful cross section of the plantain. You could really see the inside this way. Roasting, you're applying a dry heat to the starch, and so it can dry out the plantain a little bit. But so I prefer to like roast it with the peel on and then peel them afterwards. Okay, so it gets a little olive oil, and I'm gonna put it in the oven. So the plantains are roasting. I'm gonna make the sauce, which is a little bit of brown sugar, some ginger, and lemon juice. Stir that all together. And this is the sauce that dresses the plantains. They go back in the oven and get caramelized. So these got roasted for about 40 minutes. You're really just roasting it to get the plantains tender. Peel the skins off the plantains once they're cool enough to handle. And then break them up into little pieces. I mean, you can cut this with a knife, but I prefer all the little craggly ends of when you break them up. They're not so perfect, which is great. And then I'm gonna drizzle that glaze that I made over the plantains. Add in the scallions. The scallions get about a tablespoon of olive oil, and you wanna rub it in. While the plantains are roasting, I'm making the bean salad, and that's just a can of beans drained, some lemon zest, and some chopped red onion. I'm also gonna add some salt, some cayenne pepper, and some olive oil. So basically, I just cooked it until the glaze was set and the scallions are a bit charred. You'll see the plantains also have some color in them. And the last step is just to chop up some fresh herbs. I'm using cilantro and dill today. I think this is the perfect side dish for a party, a dinner party or a lunch. I think that you can also add some greens to it and have it as like salad. That's the perfect bite. Okay, so this is the last recipe. It's another way to use plantains. I'm using almost black plantains this time. It's a great way to use plantains when they are really ripe and you don't want to toss them. They're just like really ripe. It's like using a ripe banana for banana bread. It's almost like eating candy when you eat plantains that have been fried when the peel is black. I'm going to start by peeling the plantains. Again, I just take off the ends. I make a slit. And the peel should come off pretty easily. So the plantains get cut into a bowl or a mortar and pestle. If you have a large mortar and pestle, that would work really well for this. I'm gonna mash them with this. You can also do it in a food processor, but if you do it in a food processor, you have to be really careful not to process it too much. You're going for like a really chunky puree. The next step is mixing all your dry ingredients. I'm using a coarse corn flour because I want that crunch from the corn. Some baking powder, baking soda, and salt, and some flour just to bind it. I'm slicing in some scallions. I think that aromatics that pair really well with plantains are ginger, garlic, scallions. One thing I want to say is that because at this stage of ripeness, plantains are really tender and they add a lot of moisture to the dish. So I'm not adding any liquid to this. I'm adding some sour cream, but that's just about it. You just want to stir until like a clumpy dough forms and then add in your sour cream. And you're stirring this until there are no dry spots. So you want your oil somewhere between 325 and 350. If you're not using a thermometer, just put a little bit of the batter in the oil and see if it rises to the top. And that kind of tells you that it's hot enough. I'm using a teaspoon measure to drop these in. And also they puff up a little because I put baking powder and baking soda in there. You want like a deep golden brown color. I think this batter is also really great to experiment with. If you wanted to add a different type of herb, I think cilantro would be great with this. Maybe even some lime zest, some dried shrimp. It's a fun way to experiment with the flavor of plantain. I'm gonna try one of these. I do want to show you the inside of this. It's really fluffy. It's got a really nice crispy shell on the outside. So we've gone through 3 different recipes that kind of show you the versatility of a plantain. But yeah, the flavor and the texture of plantain is such that you can really pair it with a lot of different things. It's one of the reasons I really enjoy plantains because I feel like they're just such a versatile starch. All the recipes today also happen to be vegetarian. You can make them vegan with substitutions. You can add meat to it if you want meat in it. I hate plantains. No, go cook with them.